Tyler Perry had long been a symbol of triumph against the odds, a man who rose from the ashes of homelessness to sit atop a billion-dollar media empire. To Hollywood, he was the ultimate outsider turned insider, a creator who didn't wait for a seat at the table, but built his own, carved his name into the legs, and dared anyone to challenge him. But in the early summer of 2025, the house he built started to tremble. The headline was impossible to ignore. Actor files $260 million lawsuit against Tyler Perry for abuse and retaliation. The name behind the lawsuit, Derek Dixon, a relatively unknown actor to most but familiar to fans of The Oval and Ruthless, two of Perry's hit shows. He'd played a recurring character, Dale, quiet and brooding. But now, Dixon wasn't acting, he was accusing. According to the complaint filed in federal court, Perry had allegedly cultivated a private, manipulative relationship with Dixon starting in 2019. What began as professional mentorship quickly morphed into something murky, coercive, and toxic. Dixon claimed that the famed director used his position not just to shape stories, but to control lives. There was talk of inappropriate advances, of power being wielded behind closed doors, of roles dangled like bait, withdrawn when boundaries were asserted. And then there was the ultimate blow, his character, Dale, gunned down in a hail of bullets at the end of season 1. To the audience, it was just another plot twist. But to Dixon, it was a message. I was told, directly or otherwise, that if I didn't play along, Dale wouldn't survive. Turns out, they were serious. The timing of the lawsuit couldn't have been worse. Perry had recently announced a slate of upcoming projects with major networks, and rumors were swirling about a potential biopic he would direct for one of the biggest streaming platforms. Now, the narrative had changed. The empire he controlled with ironclad discipline was under scrutiny, not for its content, but for its core. The public response was immediate and polarizing. Some rallied to Perry's defense, citing decades of philanthropy, mentorship, and trailblazing work. Others, however, began to wonder if the very power that made Perry unstoppable had also made him unaccountable. His attorney issued a swift denial. Mr. Perry categorically denies all allegations. This is a baseless attempt at extortion, and we will not be intimidated. But even the strongest denials couldn't stop the questions, not just about Perry, but about the system. In an industry that had already weathered Me Too, Harvey Weinstein, and the fall of dozens of giants, this lawsuit stirred a familiar unease. Could another be hiding in plain sight? A man who controlled the writing room, the casting call, the camera, and the cut. The press leaned in. Former castmates were quietly contacted. Anonymous crew members hinted at odd behavior, whispers on set. Favored talent who rose and fell suddenly. The silence of the industry, the same silence that had shielded many before, was beginning to crack. But what elevated this case from another Hollywood scandal to a global talking point was the man's connections. Because this wasn't just about Tyler Perry, the mogul, it was about Tyler Perry, the godfather, to a royal child. For a long time, Tyler Perry was more than a Hollywood friend to Meghan Markle. He was her lifeline. In early 2020, as Meghan and Prince Harry walked away from the British royal family in a storm of headlines, Perry quietly stepped in. He offered them his secluded Beverly Hills estate. No paparazzi, no royal aides, no tabloids hiding in hedges, just quiet, guarded privacy. The kind of security money can buy and friendship can deepen. For Meghan, Perry represented more than a safe haven. He became a confidant, a counselor, a kind of surrogate family. And in 2021, when their daughter Lilibet Diana was born, Perry was named her godfather. It was a surprising choice to some. Tyler Perry, the media mogul, stepping into one of the most intimate roles a family can offer. But for Meghan and Harry, it made sense. He had protected them in a moment of absolute vulnerability. He had stood beside them when almost no one else would. That trust ran deep, until now. Because when Derek Dixon's lawsuit hit the press, alleging coercion, manipulation, and abuse, the headlines didn't just name Perry. They pulled Meghan into the narrative by association. Meghan's chosen godfather accused of coercive abuse. Did the Duchess know? From royal sanctuary to scandal magnet. The questions weren't fair, but they were loud. Why did Meghan choose him? How well did she really know the man entrusted with her child's spiritual guidance? Was it a lapse in judgment? A case of misplaced loyalty? Or just another example of her Hollywood instincts steering her into dangerous waters? For Meghan, it felt like déjà vu, another moment where her allies became liabilities, where her trust was punished with public shame. She'd lived through the brutal fallout of the Oprah interview, the Spotify drama, the Netflix overexposure. Now this. But the scrutiny wasn't hers alone anymore. It was Harry's too. And Harry, by all accounts, was not handling it well. Behind palace gates, Harry had grown up believing in quiet dignity, stiff upper lips, and clear lines between family and outsiders. Titles mattered, image mattered more, and trust? That was sacred. The idea that their daughter's godfather was now the subject of a $260 million lawsuit, one tied to sexual coercion, wasn't just embarrassing. It was devastating. He had gone along with her choices. He had embraced her world, even when it clashed with everything he knew. He'd followed her across the ocean, left his country, his family, and his title, all for a new life they were supposed to build together. But lately, it seemed like that life was being built on fault lines. Fault lines like Tyler Perry. And now, the unthinkable was being whispered in Montecito. Should Tyler remain godfather to their child? It wasn't a tabloid rumor, it was a real conversation. A painful one. Because to strip someone of that title wasn't just symbolic, it was a statement. It meant something had shattered. As the press swarmed and social media ignited with speculation, Perry remained silent. No grand interviews, no statements beyond his lawyer's brief denial. But silence in this context wasn't safety. It was space. Space for more questions, more doubt. Meghan, meanwhile, was caught between two storms, protecting her friend and protecting her family. And for the first time, those two things seemed mutually exclusive. The woman once celebrated as a modern royal rebel now faced a more chilling label. A mother who trusted the wrong man. Harry sat alone in the upstairs study, the California sun filtering through linen curtains. His fingers hovered over his phone, the screen filled with unread messages, draft replies, and one contact name that stared back like a ghost. Tyler Perry. He hadn't replied to him. Not since the news broke. Not since the world learned that the man who once opened his doors to a displaced Duke and Duchess was now accused of dark manipulations behind Hollywood's glimmering curtain. A godfather to his daughter, now a liability to his name, and worse, to hers. The public reaction hadn't been gentle. Meghan's every move, her friends, her choices, her judgment, was being re-examined under a harsh and unforgiving light. Critics weren't just asking if she knew, they were asking why she keeps choosing power players who eventually explode in scandal, from Oprah to Spotify to now this. But Harry wasn't concerned with headlines, he was concerned with trust. "We gave him our daughter," he said quietly one evening to Meghan, his voice tight. "Not a role in a play, not a seat at a table. We let him into her life." It wasn't said to wound. It was said because the wound was already there. The emotional tension between them, once manageable, had turned brittle. Their private lives, so carefully guarded after their escape from royal scrutiny, were now once again center stage. But this time, it wasn't British tabloids chasing them down. It was their own chosen world. The American machine they once hoped would embrace them was beginning to bite back. Meghan, ever composed, tried to hold the line. She pushed forward with planned projects, a new Instagram brand, lifestyle launches, speaking events. Her strategy was simple. Visibility is control. But Harry didn't want visibility. He wanted protection. He wanted to retreat, to hold his children tighter, to build something that didn't require press releases and PR teams. And yet, with every deal Meghan signed, every influencer she partnered with, he felt their world tilting further toward the very culture he had fled. He didn't blame her. Not entirely. She had ambitions, dreams, plans she'd postponed again and again for the sake of royal protocols and outdated customs. But now, those plans were rising fast and leaving him behind, and Tyler Perry was the spark that exposed the gap between them. Inside their home, a conversation began quietly, but grew heavier by the hour. What would it mean to revoke godparent status? Would it be public? Could it be done discreetly? Would Lilibet someday ask why? Every answer led to more pain, but doing nothing felt worse. Back in London, whispers among palace staff, those who still tracked the Sussexes like distant relatives, began to shift. Some wondered if Harry was considering a return, not to full-time royal duties, but something softer, a speaking tour, a foundation, a re-entry point. Because whether he said it aloud or not, Harry missed structure, he missed legacy, and most of all, he missed clarity, something the Hollywood world around him seemed to erode day by day. The Perry scandal was no longer just about what had been done, it was about what it revealed, that the line between loyalty and liability had vanished, and that Meghan and Harry were no longer moving in the same direction. When Meghan reactivated her old Instagram handle, only this time under a rebranded name with polished graphics and a cryptic floral logo, her team framed it as a new chapter. But to many watching, it felt like something else entirely, a declaration. Despite the growing firestorm surrounding Tyler Perry's lawsuit, Meghan was moving forward. Brand deals were quietly being finalized. A podcast was rumored to be in development. Lifestyle partnerships, skincare tie-ins, even whispers of a docu-series exploring modern motherhood. She was building again, but not as a royal, as a mogul. Meanwhile, the headlines hadn't slowed. If anything, they'd evolved. No longer just focused on Perry and the courtroom drama, they were now asking harder questions. Has Meghan become a brand risk? Royal exit or Hollywood hustle? Sussexes divided over scandal fallout? The Godfather narrative wouldn't go away. It clung to her family, to her child's name. The same man once hailed for rescuing them from royal exile was now dragging them into legal quicksand. Harry noticed the shift long before Meghan did. Where once the media hunted them for palace gossip, now it dissected their choices, her alliances, his silences. Every event they skipped, every hand. Inside their Montecito estate, the divide grew sharper. Meghan saw the Perry crisis as a storm to be weathered, nothing more, but for Harry, it was a warning. These people, they're not your friends when things go wrong, he told her one night, exhaustion in his voice. They're headlines, that's all. Meghan didn't flinch. She had heard this before, versions of it from the palace, from the press, even from her father's side of the family. People always questioned her instincts, her alliances, her motives. But this was different. This was Harry, and the part he couldn't say out loud was the one hurting him the most. He didn't feel heard anymore. For months they had argued in soft voices behind thick walls, both trying to shield their children from the emotional tremors. But now, Lilibet's name was in the press, tied to a man under federal investigation. It wasn't just abstract anymore. This was personal. And it was only getting worse. Publications across the UK began speculating about Harry's return to Britain. Not full-time, not officially, but in some capacity. There was talk of a commemorative event for his mother, a new mental health initiative in London, a military charity gala. He'd been invited. He hadn't declined. And Meghan? She hadn't been included. The optics were impossible to ignore. Harry returning to his roots alone. Meghan building a public empire under increasing scrutiny. Two people, once defiant together, now seemingly moving apart, frame by frame. Backstage, Perry remained silent. His lawyers filed motions, denied everything, labeled Dixon's claims as career sabotage. But the silence said what needed saying. Perry wasn't coming to their defense. He wasn't protecting Meghan this time. He wasn't even calling. And that's when the real questions started. Had Meghan placed trust in someone who never saw her as anything but a brand extension? Had Harry followed his wife into a world that didn't respect the weight of their name, but rather the size of their clickbait? The spotlight wasn't just hot anymore. It was searing. And behind the scenes, Meghan and Harry, who once promised the world they'd stand together, were beginning to wonder if they were standing on the same ground. There wasn't a press release, no joint statement, no exclusive with Oprah or carefully curated interview. But inside the walls of their Montecito home, a decision had finally been made. Tyler Perry would no longer be Lilibet Diana's godfather. It was done quietly, respectfully, at least on the surface. But in truth, it wasn't just a change of ceremonial title. It was a severing of trust, a line drawn between who Harry and Meghan had once been and who they were now being forced to become. For Harry, it was the first step in reclaiming something he hadn't felt in years: control. He had spent so long playing the role dutiful prince, protective husband, outspoken rebel. But in the process, he had lost something vital, something grounding. His compass had spun wildly since the moment he boarded that plane out of Heathrow. And now, as the Perry scandal spun around them like a whirlwind, he saw clearly what he'd missed all along. Stability wasn't a location, it was a boundary. And Meghan? She didn't object. Not this time. There was no shouting, no defending, no last-minute calls to Perry, just quiet acceptance. She had fought so many battles these last few years, against the press, against the institution, against public perception, but this was a wound she didn't know how to close. Her silence wasn't weakness, it was grief. The grief of realizing that no matter how carefully she built her world, no matter how meticulously she selected her allies, scandal would always find her. Because she wasn't just Meghan anymore. She was Meghan, Duchess of Sussex, mother to a royal child, wife to a prince, and a lightning rod for every cultural war playing out between monarchy and modernity. And in that identity, there was no room for error, no forgiveness for misjudgment. No buffer when the people you trusted became headlines. The media, as expected, caught wind of the decision weeks later. Leaks, whispers, sourced, exclusives. Tyler Perry quietly removed from Godfather role. Royal rift deepens after $260 million lawsuit fallout. And in response, Tyler Perry said nothing. He had gone dark. No tweets, no statements, no public show of support or rebuttal. The man who once welcomed Meghan and Harry with open arms had become a name neither side now spoke aloud. But the damage had been done. What started as one man's lawsuit became a mirror for everything fragile in Harry and Meghan's world. The split between values and visibility, between loyalty and judgment, between protection and ambition. Harry, for his part, began spending more time in the UK, officially for charity events, unofficially for space. Space to breathe, space to recalibrate. There were rumors of quiet meetings with palace advisors, unofficial dinners, a slow, cautious re-entry into the world he once fled. And Meghan, she remained in California. She continued to build, to post, to curate. Her empire was still alive, but the shine had dulled. She had learned, again, that power came with a price. That being seen could mean being targeted, that trust, once broken, can't always be rebuilt. Especially when it involves your child, especially when the world is watching. They had left royalty behind to find freedom, but in Hollywood, they found something else entirely, a throne made of glass. And now, as cracks spread across its surface, the question that echoed louder than ever wasn't about Tyler Perry. It wasn't even about the lawsuit. It was about them. What do Harry and Meghan become?